Welcome to a session on rapid, reliable, and resilient recovery with the Veeam data platform. I'm Brad Lynch. I manage the enterprise system engineering team at Veeam. I'm joined with my good friend Edwin here. Edwin, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Brad. Edwin Radema, I'm a field CTO at EMEA, and I'm specialized in cybersecurity.
Perfect. Well, we're really excited to go through. You're going to leave here really understanding how and why Veeam has the most rapid, reliable, resilient recovery in the industry. So let's get started here. Before we go into the details and the nitty gritty on the how and the why, really want to highlight an interesting survey we did to 4,200 different companies, and these were random companies. They could have had different storage vendors, different security tools, different backup software. We really don't know what they had. That wasn't part of the survey, but there was really three data points that really stood out that unfortunately were also very scary. But first, what was interesting is that 85% of these 4,200 said they had been hit by a ransomware attack within the last year. In addition to that, this second data point really stood out to me and is really why ransomware isn't just a disaster, right? It's important that you start to plan for ransomware recovery as if it's a disaster, but it's also the worst kind of disaster, right? And this second data point was that on average, it took 1 to 2 weeks to recover from a ransomware recovery. And it's important to note that because recovering from a ransomware attack isn't the same as, a power outage in data center A and recovering in data center B or a tornado or whatever it might be. There's a whole additional step when it comes to recovering from ransomware, and that's forensics. That's scanning these machines, whatever backup point you're choosing from, and ensuring you're not just restoring more ransomware and malware back into production. And that piece can add a heavy lift into the recovery process. The third data point that was tragic really is that 19%, only 19% of companies were able to recover without paying a ransom. And what Edwin and I are going to go through today is hopefully not only going to increase that 19% to a higher percentage, but make you be part of that percentage.
So yeah, if you're looking at the whole thing about the recovery and those numbers, those really scare us. But we also have to get those numbers up, so you don't have to pay that ransom, and you can easily recover and also have confidence in recovery. That's also why we say design for recovery. Because if you look at the past, what we did is 100% backup, because you need that backup, right? But only 3 to 5% was restore, because someone tripped over something, someone deleted something, something came in, or something burned down. That was only 3 to 5%. So what we all did is design for backup. So making sure that the backup was so economically friendly, making sure that it's being stored on like a post stamp, so crunch it a lot, and making sure that it will fit within the 24-hour window. But if you only do the 5% change rate every day, and that should fit in the 24-hour window, that means that if something really hits your environment, like for instance ransomware, you cannot touch anything. You have to restore everything. So you go to the present, 100% backup. It's still 100%, but you also need 100% restore. But you just designed the whole infrastructure, right, for 5% in an incremental phase, and making sure that it's squeezed, so it's already packed. It has to be rehydrated. That 100% restore, that's why we're focusing. That's why we say design for recovery. And a lot of organizations, 95% of all organizations, design for backup, making sure it's the last line, making sure that we have a backup, but we never hope to touch it. But things changed. If you look at the current economy and also the current threat levels, you have to have 100% restore, but also fast restore. So we have to rethink a whole approach about how we design infrastructures. So that's why we say design for recovery, and we will dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, 100% Edwin, right? Designing for recovery is skipped one slide too many. Designing for recovery is so key here. And Edwin and I are going to go through some real life examples of that. But what's important to note on why Veeam can offer the best rapid, reliable, resilient recovery is because of our ability to recover off multiple platforms. And not only multiple platforms, but fast platforms, right? Veeam offers the ability to recover off a CDP replica, continuous data protection replica, a snapshot replica, a backup, and a storage array. And what's so key about this is that the CDP and replica, this gives you the ability to essentially recover in the time it takes to boot up a machine. Now, granted, in both those cases, you'd have to catch ransomware really early in its tracks, which isn't always the case. But the other options with Veeam being software only is you can back up to any target of your choosing. Yeah, sure, it could be a dedupe appliance, it could be a Cisco 3260, a Dell server, an HP Apollo, an Infinidad, the list goes on, but you can also back up to an all-flash array. And there might be some people kind of giving me that crooked look, and it's the same look though that we used to get when you would talk about backing up to disk instead of tape. People used to think that was crazy. And I'm certainly not recommending that you back up, 1,000 machines. If you have 1,000 machines to flash, that would be very costly, but it might make sense for these tier 0, tier 1 workloads to go to a fast performing target. And now in a ransomware recovery, or really anywhere recovery, you're talking about much faster speeds and feeds versus disk. That's just physics. But then the other piece here that's so impressive is we integrate with 96 different storage platforms. And when we talk about integration with that, I'm talking about the ability to recover from snapshots taken on your production storage arrays, right? The storage arrays that your actual data stores, your production storage lives on, and whether we orchestrated those snapshots or not, or just they're kind of in a catalog view stage, we can recover from those snapshots. And I know, Edwin, you're going to go into much more detail about a real life scenario where we actually helped a customer recover from ransomware doing just that. So I'd love for you to share a bit more.
Yeah, so let's take it over there. So I brought one of those field cases, and I was talking to this potential customer because they weren't a customer at that moment in time. And what happened was they have 2 data centers. They use storage snapshots between them. They had an HPE FreePart that was in sync. But when I was at the table, we were discussing about disasters, and also ransomware passed along. But he was a little bit reluctant, like, yeah, that will never happen to us. But somehow something really bad happened. When I was driving home, I got a phone call, like, "Hey, please come back because we were talking about this and we don't know how, but we just got hit by ransomware." And what happened was that both data centers became unavailable. Things got encrypted. So we're really a little bit shaken about that one. But the first thing we had to do is bring forensics in because we didn't know how they came into the infrastructure, if they are still in the infrastructure. So forensics started. And one thing that happened there was they pulled out a ribbon around the data center. Everything in the data center is off limits. Police line, do not cross. Hold on, how are we going to recover them? That's an interesting part. So we were looking through how we could help this organization, and I knew that they had snapshots between those data centers that are in sync, but I had no location to go to in a recovery mode. So we started going back and forth with the forensics party, and we asked them, okay, can we maybe use that second data center, disconnect the link between those two, and then start recovering in the second data center after we wipe everything? They were like, no, you cannot touch anything. Hold on, there's also some virtual machines up in AWS. You are going to call them, or are we going to call them? And they were, good point. Let's dive into that. And they said, okay, if we can control that one data center because it's a mirror to the other one, you can use the second one. So we broke the mirror between that, cleaned the whole organization and the infrastructure there, and we started installing Veeam backup replication there. So one part of the Veeam data platform. Because we could boot that up, we could connect those storage snapshots to Veeam, and they were not orchestrated by Veeam, but we could just connect them and read them. And we started doing recovery. And that also was interesting for the forensics party because they now had like one that was unavailable, what they were researching and what was going to happen, and they could control and go back in time in the other one. So they could compare those two like different points in time. Because of that was a really interesting case, but they could survive because they had storage snapshots there. So that's one part in the whole big puzzle, or one puzzle piece, I should say, that can help you get out of like trouble really fast there. So let's dive into that Veeam high-level architecture about the storage snapshot. So what happened? They have a storage system. We have a backup proxy connected with the Veeam as a the management plane, and then the data plane is the backup proxy and scalar repository. You can just move it over. So you could use the primary storage snapshots for backup. But you can also, if you have some that are integrated, we can also do a backup from the secondary. So go to the second data center and do the backup from there. But we can also use a snapshot only mode. So we control and orchestrate the storage array through the integration, through the plugin. And we just ask them to do a snapshot like every hour. So you will have a round robin principle for 24 hours. You have every hour you have a snapshot on storage. And don't get me wrong, storage snapshots are not a backup, but it can really help you get out of problems fast. So that's one part you should think about. And if you look at the whole thing and the explorers we have, so the Veeam Explorer for storage snapshots, you can just go there, get that snapshot, restore application item. So you don't have to restore the whole snapshot. You can just go in there, take those particular machines, a virtual machine, a disk, an object. So really granular, we can just go in there and do restore. So not just getting the whole snapshot and putting it back and that's all. No, you can just run through. And that was the interesting party also for the forensics party that really wanted to see some virtual machines that they had a target on because they were thinking those were being breached and they are being used in the attack. So that's where we could help them also. But we also have like another case, and I think you brought this one, Brad. So can you really shine a light on this one?
Yeah, absolutely, Edwin. And I love that use case. And I had a similar customer who recovered 1,700 VMs in the same manner, right? When you see how we can see your storage array, see the LUNs on your storage array, see the snapshots on those LUNs, see the VMs on those snapshots, I find that companies are really impressed by that. So great example. The next one I'm really excited to go through is really highlights the data mobility piece, right? So Edwin did a great job describing kind of our ability to offer rapid recovery, and that works whether we orchestrated those snapshots or not, right? Which is really key. But the next piece is the data mobility piece. So I had a company, unfortunately, who was hit by ransomware. Seems 85% of them are apparently, and this account was not taking advantage of our Linux hardened repository or immutability, unfortunately. So the attacker was able to delete all their backups on premise, was able to render their Veeam backup server on premise completely useless. And luckily they were taking secondary copies out to Azure Blob. So they really weren't all that affected. They were able to they already had a Veeam backup server deployed in Azure. They usually keep it turned off to save on cost. And all they really had to do was turn it on, scan Azure Blob for the latest recovery points, and then start recovering on-prem virtual machines that we were backing up and boot them up as Azure VMs, right? And Veeam does that conversion process for you. We do the conversion from VMware to Azure, and this same scenario would apply if it was AWS or GCP. And this data mobility piece is really key to Veeam's story. The cloud data management is something we firmly believe in, right? So whether you're going from VMware to Azure, Azure to AWS, AWS to GCP, right? I don't know, however many permutations there are of all that, it's very easy within Veeam, right? I mean, these are all built into the user interface. This isn't scripted solutions we're talking about here. So also something that's really key as part of this recovery process for this customer is I talked about earlier how it takes 1 to 2 weeks to recover on average because of that forensics piece, right? That scanning and making sure you're not recovering malware back into production. Well, before they restored these machines back into Azure VMs, they were able to leverage, and we're going to go deeper into this, but they were able to leverage Veeam's secure restore feature, which scans the backup file for malware before it recovers it back into the production. And you have the option, if it finds anything, to abort it or restore it without a network attached and do some investigation. So another really good example. And we even have another one to really hit home on all the different recovery options Veeam has. If you want to highlight that, Edwin.
Yes, let's go to field case number 3. Also, a customer that was already looking at Veeam, they got hit by ransomware, and this one, even the customer has been on stage on Veeam On in May last year, explaining what happened to their organization. So they got hit by ransomware, and he was fishing with his son. But he had some kind of a feeling, and then when he got a phone call from a colleague, yeah, there's something going on, something is sluggish, and he was like, okay, can you do me one favor? Please pull the backups offline. But yeah, we're doing a backup now. No, please pull them offline. And because they pulled the backups offline, they had some backups available. The data center became unavailable. Also, the whole thing ribbon around it, unavailable to do anything there. You cannot recover there. But they also had some other thing there. They had a password vault for all different accounts, but you can already guess what's going on there. That was on production, so that was also encrypted. Fortunately, they had a copy with an admin at home, so they were not really sure what to do about that one, fire the guy or hug the guy, and fortunately they chose the last one, hug the guy, not to death, but hey, they hugged him because he had the only copy of the whole password vault, and because of that they could rent new hardware. So that's also what they did. They rebuilt really fast, and even the rented hardware was being built on a Sunday. So they've been hit on a Saturday because of his personal network of people. The CISO of that company could call out, and some of those were even on holiday, and they came back to help that organization. That's where friends are for. So that's also collaboration and making sure that you have people that know and that can help you is really important there. So they rented new hardware, they did a rebuild on that new hardware, and that's why they could fire up again. Within a few weeks, they were completely running again. That's where we also came in. We helped them because before they started to build up everything again, they needed a clean copy. So they could do restore, but in the restore, most likely there would be some kind of malware, some things that shouldn't be there. So they wanted to have a backup first before anything went to the new infrastructure. So there was a completely new, clean infrastructure. They needed a backup. That's where we came in as Veeam. They installed us there. And as soon as they did a restore, they did a backup, and also they used us again to create multiple copies so that the forensics party could compare some things. And they went through a whole washing street mechanism to making sure that anything from the old backups was being restored, compared, controlled. If it was good, so green, ticked off, shipped on to the new infrastructure. It could also be yellow. There's something in there we don't know exactly, so we need more forensics. Or it was red because don't touch this one, drop it. There's also some of those nuggets that are in Veeam backup replication, what a lot of people don't know about. We have discussed this before, Brad, but this the whole thing about compare. Because if you have been hit and you have like tens of thousands of machines, or even 1,000 or 100, you don't want to push just that button to restore everything. You want to know, okay, forensics party, what has been hit, what is sketchy. So you want to have some compare option there. And what we have now is an easily restore only changed files feature in V12 now that also shows between different points what's going on. And you will see on the right hand side the item state. Is it identical? Is it changed? So only the things that changed are changed, you should restore there. And let's compare with production. So you see the production, you see a point. You can also say, I do a restore first of a lot of those machines and then compare with an earlier restore point, because you're not completely sure when it hit. But as you know, a particular time and date when ransomware started popping up, you know where to compare to. But not just for files. We have this also for Microsoft Active Directory, and we had this already in the product for several years. Not a lot of people know about it, but I always get cake about this. So normally when there's something going on in Active Directory and people are, yeah, I didn't do anything. It's like, okay, I want to bet you cake that I can find who did something with Active Directory. If you have a backup, you can just get production, get a backup, and compare. And because of comparing, I can also say, okay, show changed objects only, and I can also see who changed that object. Often people are, hold on, maybe I did something wrong. I changed something. That's a good thing. And if you look at the whole ransomware thing, a lot of forensics party will say, okay, they touched Active Directory, so we have to scratch everything and rebuild. But if you really look at Active Directory, you have millions of objects there. You don't want to start from scratch, right? And I've seen some companies, shipping companies, that were really lucky that they had an Active Directory somewhere in a different country with a really sketchy link, so it didn't sync the changes yet, so they could just take that server, get it back on the headquarters and do the restore. But also this one could really help you get out of trouble. Just use the compare functionality and show changed objects, and change it to a state where you're comfortable with. That brings me to something else, and that's instant recovery. Can you run us through there, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely, Edwin. And I totally agree. That's one of Veeam's most underrated features. And the compare to production goes beyond just that, right? We could do it with M365. We could do it with AWS's VPCs, which is great for just seeing if you had some weird network changes, maybe you change a security group or something. So the compare functionality is really powerful. In addition to that, this kind of goes into, Edwin and I highlighted the data mobility piece for recovery. We highlighted recovering quickly off of a storage snapshot, but also this instant recovery piece. And this goes into what I was talking about, how Veeam being software only, you can really design not only a cost-effective solution, but a fast-performing solution by maybe taking a mission-critical tier 0, tier 1 workloads and backing them up to all-flash storage or something fast-performing. And this gives you the ability to quickly recover a number of different sources, right? We can do instant recovery for virtual machines, for physical servers. We'll do physical servers to virtual, cloud instances, file shares, databases, VMDKs, right? So just the disk of a VM. So for example, maybe you have DBAs, SQL and Oracle DBAs doing dumps to a drive. If that drive were to get corrupted, well, rather than recovering that whole VM, you could just do an instant recovery of that disk, right? So really powerful options in terms of the instant recovery solutions we have. And sure, this will work with any type of backup repository, right? This will work with a dedupe appliance, a NAS share, but you can make this go much quicker based on the repository you use. And something that is new to version 12 here that I just want to highlight is the file share. So in version 11, we did have the ability to instantly recover SMB shares. Well, now that also applies to NFS shares as well. So this also gives you the ability to kind of design a cost-effective solution once again, right? So maybe today you're replicating your NAS device from site A to site B or whatever it might be, and you're just doing snapshots. Well, you could potentially save yourself a lot of money, back up that data, and if in the case that you were to actually lose your production NAS device, we could instantly present that file share data. Your employees would have, whack, they would be able to still access their file share data, albeit it's going to be a little slower coming off a backup repository, but it's a potential solution that can save your business a lot of money. So just wanted to highlight that as a new version 12 feature, which makes it really easy to make that file share data available. It also makes it really easy to migrate that data. So maybe you're moving NAS devices. Well, Veeam could restore that file share anywhere. It doesn't have to be to the same device. So really exciting stuff there. So next I want to get into the ransomware frequency, right? I showed earlier how 85% of companies unfortunately say they have been hit by ransomware. And the name of this presentation is Rapid, Reliable, Resilient Recovery. And Edwin and I kind of highlighted several field cases of how Veeam can be rapid, right? In terms of snapshots, data mobility to the cloud, instant recovery, things like that. Well, I want to dig into the reliable piece a little bit. So unfortunately, not only did 85% of companies get hit by ransomware in the last year, 50% got hit more than once. 50% got hit 2 or 3 times, and then even 75% got hit 4 or 5 times. So it's a really alarming stat. And as you can see here, right? And if I would venture to guess, the 15% that said they weren't hit by a ransomware attack, they might not have just been comfortable admitting something on a survey. So I would guess, unfortunately, it's even a little bit higher. What I want to dig into more of this, though, is, Edwin talked about designing for recovery. Well, as part of this ransomware recovery, you probably want to design as if you're going to recover everything. So let's say you have 1,000 machines and 500 terabytes of data. Let's plan for the worst. Let's plan as if you're going to recover everything. But this data point was really interesting that about half, 47% of data was encrypted. So if you are planning for everything and you feel confident you can meet your RTOs based on the plan you've put in place and some examples Edwin and I have given, and it turns out you only have to recover half, well, you're going to be in a really good position, right? So this was also a really interesting statistic we're showing. So, and part of that, finding out that data that is encrypted, Veeam does have several alarms, several reports that can help with this, right? So Veeam One's tool is a very powerful tool that goes well beyond the basic backup reporting and things like that. It digs into the actual production VMs, the snapshots on those VMs, things like that. And here, just a few examples of how Veeam One can help with ransomware is we have an alarm that's called possible ransomware activity, right? And this alarm is actually looking at your production VMs, right? It's looking at the VM level. It's not looking at your backup data or things like that. It's looking at the production VMs, and based on the rules you set, it's essentially looking for spikes in CPU, spikes in RAM, things of that nature, spikes in data store write rates, all things that can be, signs of encryption taking place. Those are heavy CPU activities. And one of the key things, right, we talked about, part of the reason ransomware recovery takes so long is the forensic piece, which Edwin touched on, but also figuring out when ransomware took place. And what's nice about this alarm is it gives you a historical view of your virtual machines. So you can potentially say, hey, all of a sudden on, 7 days ago, we got a huge spike in activity on a bunch of machines. Well, that might be a good place to look to start recovering data. The next alarm here is the suspicious backup size, right? So we'll look based on patterns of your historical patterns in your backup data. If all of a sudden there's a huge spike in the size, right? So, maybe typically your incremental backup size is 100 terabytes, just making up a number. And all of a sudden that goes up to 200 terabytes, 250, 300 terabytes. Well, that's a really good sign that we're backing up encrypted data because we can't get good change block tracking. We can't get good dedupe rates. And, you might want to do some investigation into that. This alarm is really along kind of that same lines. It's looking for an unusual job duration, right? So it'll tell you a very paint a similar picture in that all of a sudden your jobs were 6 hours and now they're 12 hours because we're backing up so much more data. And there might have been a planned event that accounts for that, but if there wasn't, you're going to want to do some investigation into it. And then lastly, one that I really like is you want to figure out, once the forensic process starts, you want to figure out what account was compromised, right? And this report really helps you figure out who changed what, when they changed it, and what specifically they changed it. And even more, something that's not pictured here that we should add is we also have an alarm that looks at login attempts. If you're not just within our product, but within vCenter, if we see somebody's constantly trying to log into vCenter, we can alert you of that. So just some really good options that go well beyond the basic backup and reporting that come with a monitoring backup product.
Yeah, before you continue, Brad, I think that's a really good point because we can also scan already production. So it is not just the backup. We already look for suspicious activities in your production environment. That's correct,
100%.
right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what's so key, right, Edwin? Yeah, we're looking at production and your backup data. That kind of goes to the compare feature, right? We're trying to look at both at the same time for you. The next piece here is what we call secure restore. That's really scanning your backup files to make sure you have a copy that you can restore into production safely. And this once again ties into that 1 to 2 week period of recovery. To best plan for a ransom recovery, you need to know as soon as you identify ransomware, you need to know what copy you're going to recover from. If you have to spend time saying, okay, let's test yesterday's backup, oh, that doesn't work. Let's test 2 days ago, oh, that doesn't work. 3 days. If you have to do that process, you're already in a hole. You're already gonna be in a rough situation. Whereas this allows you to schedule. You can say, hey, after my backup runs, immediately run the secure restore. Well, we'll scan the volumes on that backup file and essentially let you know if we found anything malicious or anything of that nature, or thumbs up, everything looks good. So this essentially works with any AV tool that has a CLI front end. You can see here I'm using ESET. Out of the box, it uses Windows Defender, but you can use any AV tool that has a CLI. And we often recommend, right? So oftentimes the question is, well, we're already have an endpoint scanner on our production machines. What is this doing? So we'll often recommend make sure you keep a more up-to-date version of that scanner, or use a different scanner, right? Make sure you're using multiple scanners. That way you get it at both ends. And with that, Edwin, I'd love for you to kind of dive a little deeper on this one so people can understand it.
Yeah, secure restore. It sounds like magic. Sometimes it is, but it really isn't, to be honest. So let's dive into that one a little bit deeper and show people how we're doing this. So you have secure restore. That's a feature, and that can be applied to different jobs. For instance, if you have a secure backup job, for instance, so you want to test if the backups are doing it fine, everything is green. We always want to do restore. So secure backup, so not secure restore, but secure backup, has a job, runs through, pops up like a bubble, a data lab, starts restoring, and you have some different tests that you can test in that. The secure restore can be applied also to the secure backup. And if you look at production, you only have a few seconds in production to do scanning, right? Because you don't want to hamper the production. Don't really have sluggish response rates in production. So you only have a few seconds to do fast scanning. So sometimes something slips through. But if you use secure restore, and that's where you get like a restore point, so you did a backup, get the restore point Veeam backup replication from the backup repository, fire up the mount server, mounts the disks directly from the backup file to the mount server there. Any antivirus that has been installed, or anti-malware, depending on how it's being marketed in the market. What Brad talked about is if it has a command line feature, you can apply it. We already have 6 now in version 12 that are Veeam integrated. So if you go to the website and you search for Veeam integrated in the database, you will see more that have already been tested. But even if it's not there and has a command line, you can use it. So it starts that data lab and starts doing an antivirus check, running through those disks, and not just that 3 seconds. No, it will go deep diving, but also means that it takes more time. So if you have 1,000 machines, you don't want to do 1,000 machines all at once to do that check, especially when you do a deep dive, because that could take up to 8 hours. But that also means that the software you're using for malware finding gets the time to do its thing. They can deep dive, they can compare things, they can see if there's really something behind it. Sometimes they will flag something and it's like, okay, we don't really sure because we need more time to find that. This is where secure restore really helps, because if no infections are found, it will just say, okay, continue to restore. So if you had to do restore because of an incident, this is the first step. No infections found for this machine, so continue to restore. It can also be, hold on, we found something. We're not really sure, or we cannot clean it at this moment in time. So let's say this is yellow. The other one is green, this one is yellow. We will restore it in that bubble, in that data lab, but we will disable the network. So you can go in with a console and do things, or even remove manually those files, or do forensics. Forensics parties will love this particular feature. But you will have a recovery in there. And then after that one, you can check it again. If you're comfortable, you can do a push through to production or to a different recovery site. But sometimes it also happens that an infection is found. What we will do at that moment in time is stop the restore and drop it. So if the infection is found and we cannot do anything about it, so the malware cannot clean it, that's one of those things. It can just stop the restore because you don't want that back in production, right? And you have to figure out another way to get there. And that can also be an instant recovery into a shielded environment and see what's going to happen. Sometimes forensics parties use instant restore in a shielded environment to see, as soon as that machine is restored, will it start that wildfire again within the boundaries there. And that's a good thing about the whole secure restore. And secure restore can be applied to different jobs, different things. So that's the whole thing, how that secure restore process is working. Well, we use it also in other products, right, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely, Edwin, right? So our orchestrator product, which is part of the Veeam data platform, takes us to the next level. It does everything Edwin just described, what I described before that, but it'll do it automatically and go through everything. So let's just walk through this a little bit. So it will essentially, it'll look based on what you define in the screenshot you see in front of you, how often to go through. So you can say, hey, run this every day, or run this once a week, run this once a month, a quarter, whatever you decide, and it'll go through however many restore points you define until it finds a clean data point. So hopefully you're going about this in a more proactive way, but if you do find yourself in a more reactive ransomware recovery, this is still a great option to say, hey, we don't want to sit here and watch this go through every single scanning, and if something fails, then manually mount another one and scan it again. Let's just say, hey, let's go through the last 10 or 20, however many you think you need, and just run through and notify me when you find a clean recovery point to restore back into production. So a really powerful tool here. As you can see, based on kind of the statistics here, it's using Windows Defender, and we can do this with virtual machines. We can do this with agents. We can also do this as a DR to Azure, right? So we support Azure today with this orchestrator tool to be able to do everything we're describing here directly into Azure, and kind of go through my field case number 2, right? With this ability, you'd be able to directly recover your data in Azure in the event that data center 1 went down, and it would automate all of that for you. It would add in the security, the ports, everything you would need from that perspective. And we can see here, it says no threats were found. I'm using Windows Defender in this case, so we're mixing it up. We used ESET before, but a really powerful tool. And this could all be sent to you in a report. It could be sent to your manager or director in a report in a really easy fashion to kind of say, hey, thumbs up or thumbs down on what recovery point we can use. So the next piece here is, rapid, reliable, resilient recovery with the Veeam data platform, right? So the next piece here is kind of that resilient piece. We went through some rapid options we have with some field cases, how we can be very reliable with some different alarms and alerting and reports and scanning technologies and things of that nature. And the last piece is resilient. So another question we asked as part of this survey to 4,200 companies out there that I found really interesting was we asked them what repository do they use that they consider to be, their resilient repository, whether it's air-gapped, whether it's offline, whether it's immutable, whatever it might be. And honestly, I took this as really positive. The results were surprising to me in that it seems like for the most part, everybody is using something that could be considered, an offline, a secondary copy, an immutable copy, or something like that, or most people are, which was really promising. What probably stood out to me the most is over half, almost 60% are using Amazon or Azure. And you saw that in my field case number 2. This company was taking a secondary copy out to Azure, and we definitely see that a lot. And I honestly also see on-premise object storage all the time. I see a lot of EMC ECS, a lot of NetApp Storage Grid, Cloudian, the list goes on, and even smaller service providers like Wasabi and things like that are getting much more popular because of the price tag. So some really great options here. And then lastly, tape is still a quarter. It's almost a quarter of what people are using, and honestly, it's really the only true air-gapped solution out there. No matter what, a lot of people say different things in the industry. In my personal opinion, tape is, if you really want true air-gapped and you're using that definition to the fullest, where nobody can access that data, it's off of the network, all of that, tape is just about the only thing that meets that, in my opinion. And unfortunately, 5% of people apparently doing nothing. So hopefully we can make that 0% when we run this report next year. But Edwin, I wanted to ask you a question that comes up almost all the time when we get into these discussions, is that conversation of air-gapped versus immutability, and I'd love for you to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point there, because we hear a lot of different terms there. So immutability, we talked about that, but also hardened. Like, yeah, we have a hardened Linux repository. Yeah, that's good, but it also means that it's tied to immutability. Yeah, but it's not the same. We also talked about air-gapped, and you talked about the tape being air-gapped. That's a really good thing. What I've done in the past is I designed and built a lot of those robotic streets for tape. Then I helped them dismantle them. Now I'm introducing them again, but tape and the way tape is being used is changing. In the past, it was just for long-term retention. If you look at the tape now, it's being used for short-term with that mutability characteristics, because that tape itself, if you remove it from the drive, you can make it immutable. You can take it with you, so air-gapped, and you can also take it offline somewhere else. And that's the whole thing about tape. Why did we stop using tape like 10 years ago? That was about the handling cost. But if you look at the handling cost now, and you look at the ransomware cost associated to recovery, that's way, way more. That's why we see that thing. But these terms are often being mingled or even being interchanged, while that's not really the case, because immutability is about protecting against modification and deletion. Harden means you're looking through your infrastructure and see where all those attack vectors are, and you try to close down as many attack vectors as possible without hampering your production and your organization, or even the possibility to maintain your infrastructure. And air-gapped is about making sure that you have a copy of that data that's somewhere else. And some people will say, yeah, but we have it in the cloud, and it's immutable in the cloud, so we have an air-gap. Sort of. You have a logical air-gap because someone else can still log into that cloud, for instance, and delete it. And you say, yeah, hold on, but it's immutable. Yeah, but think about it this way. If you have immutability, for instance, with Microsoft or AWS, and you don't pay the bill, what do you think will happen? They will delete your data. And that's true, because if you also make an accident, and I did that in my lab, so he said immutability to 99 years, now you have to wait 99 years before you can clean it up. So as long as someone has control or access to the physical location where the data is residing, they always have a way to delete it. That's why we say an air-gap. For instance, that tape, what Brad talked about, that's really an air-gap, because you can take it with you, put it in a physical vault, nobody can touch it online. So if it's still online, it can be a logical air-gap. That's where you see that it's different. But I want to emphasize that combining those three puzzle pieces, so immutability plus hardened plus air-gapped, that's the real beauty there, because then you understand those three things, but that brings to a secure solution. Because combining those, that's also the 3-to-1 rule, making sure that you have different copies, that one is hardened, and also one is air-gapped there, offline, making sure that you have the secure backup. That brings me to something what we do in the Scale-out Backup repository. We have a performance tier there. We have different options where you can choose from. You can let the first data from the first backup land on direct attached storage, for instance, or to an S3 compatible object storage with immutability, object lock we can leverage. We can also go to like a dedupe appliance, and also to the hardened repository. So we have the hardened again, and we have the immutability again. And from there, we can also tier it to capacity tier. We have options there for S3 compatible on-prem, but also go to, for instance, Amazon S3 or Azure and Blob Storage. From there, we can even tier it down to archive tier. And where you all see those logs, that means that there is immutability. So you have immutability over all those different levels, from the first backup to like the second copy and the third copy, making sure that you have immutability all through the data path there. You also see some logos on the right top hand. There's the Veeam Ready, and I was also talking about the Veeam Ready integration. That's not up there, but we have Veeam Ready for repository, Veeam Ready for object, Veeam Ready for object with immutability, and we also have Veeam Ready for integrations. By looking through that list, you can find something that will work, what you already have in your infrastructure, for instance, because we don't want to, that's the beauty, what I think about software-defined, we don't want to rip and replace anything in your infrastructure because you already invested something in there, but we want to use those components you already invested in to the maximum capacity, and also making sure that you leverage all the features that are in there. That's also why we have the APIs, the storage APIs, and we also bring version 2 now in V12, making sure that those integrations really work. And if you look from the start, and I've been here for 6.5 years now, we're almost doubling every year in the number of integrations we have. And that's the really cool thing. So you as a customer has the ability and also the right things to choose from, freedom of choice. So freedom of choice also means that you have to make choices, Brad. And talking about choices, what should you recommend?
Yeah, great question, Edwin. And really exciting stuff as part of the version 12 data platform, right? The ability to back up directly to the object, support for the Azure immutability, These are things folks have wanted for quite some time. And in terms of really digging kind of a layer deeper into Edwin's slide there, is you see here the different resilient medias you can use as your immutable or offline or air-gapped option, right? From the Veeam Ready object immutability options with AWS, Azure, Cloudian, Wasabi, ECS, Storage Grid. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think there's 30 or 40 now. To Edwin's point, it's amazing how many integrations we have with different storage vendors, which is the great thing about being software only. To tape, so it really depends on what you want to accomplish, right? You have to factor in speed of recovery. You know, with greater security comes simplicity, right? Or speed of resource. So these are things you kind of have to balance. And tape, like we were talking about, right? I mean, it can be a great option. Tape is making a comeback, as we've all kind of heard lately. It can be a very cost-effective option. It could probably be the most secure option. Storage snapshot. So Edwin talked about that in his field case number 1. I've personally seen that as well with different customers who are able to recover. And this is a very fast recovery option, right? So the ability to essentially, with different storage vendors. So I know, so for example, Pure has it with their flash mode, where they're essentially able to, if somebody tries to delete snapshots, you know, it won't work. You know, you can't, if you have a retention set for a week, 3 days, whatever it is, you won't be able to delete them. And I'm sure other storage vendors have that as well. One that I really like, and is probably the most underrated on this screen, is the Veeam Cloud Connect with Insider Protection. So we have over 20,000 VCSP providers that integrate with Veeam and support Veeam as a backup as a service option, essentially. And with this insider protection that's many of them offer, you can send your secondary copy or offsite copy out to one of these service providers, and they'll also add in this feature called insider protection. And what this does is, let's say in a worst case scenario, attacker gets in, they delete your primary copies, they're able to see your secondary copies out in the VCSP environment, they're able to delete those. Well, with insider protection, there's a whole third hidden copy that not even you can see as a Veeam admin. You can't delete it, you can't touch it, anything like that. So in a scenario where somehow the hacker does delete all of that data or render it useless, your service provider could simply take that third hidden copy, recover it, and you'll be off and running, recovering your data. So a really unique option that honestly probably not enough companies take advantage of. And then of course our Veeam hardened repository. I mean, anybody backing up on-prem should be using our Linux hardened repository or object immutability as their primary copy. But there's really no reason, in my opinion, your primary copy can't be immutable, and then your secondary copy can of course be offline or immutable as well. Lastly, we kind of put this in orange for, and that's replication and storage snapshots, because most likely you're not going to have a long retention on these. You know, with backups or secondary copies, you're going to have a 30, 60, 90-day retention. And if you find out ransomware was prevalent 3 weeks ago, you know, you still have a point in time that you can recover from. But with the cases of snapshot and replication, your retention is more likely going to be a day, 2 days, maybe a week at most. And so unless you're catching ransomware early in its tracks, it's not going to work. But if you do catch it early in its tracks, I mean, this is the fastest recovery option possible. And it's great that Veeam offers replication all in the same UI, license, and product, which is really rare, right? I mean, typically you have to have a whole separate replication solution with SRM or Zerto or something like that. And that's all just offered in the Veeam umbrella. So lastly here, just to kind of recap, right? We've covered rapid, reliable, resilient recovery with the Veeam data platform, right? So everything from pre-breach to post-breach, making sure that you're designing for recovery, pre-breach, making sure you're using our alarms, you're using our scanning technologies, but in a worst case scenario, you planned for the disaster, right? You designed for recovery, to Edwin's point. You haven't just designed for backup. You have a resilient copy you can recover from, and you have the ability to rapidly recover that data through instant recovery, through replicas, through snapshots, through things of that nature. So with that, we really thank you for the time. I enjoyed presenting with you, Edwin. It was a lot of fun, and we hope you all enjoy version 12's Veeam data platform.
Yes, thank you, Brett. Until next time.